Welcome to the second presentation of the FORCE Preparatory Fitness Program delivery. Today, we'll be going through the rush strength portion of the programming, which are scheduled to be done on Mondays in the ideal 5-day format that we have suggested. If you're not doing the 5-day program, remember to prioritize your days accordingly. And if you want to work on rushes, this rush strength specific workout is definitely recommended. Try to include it into your schedule at least once a week. Additionally, remember that the technique that we recommend for the rushes component of the force test requires significant hip mobility and stability, specifically in terms of flexion. So if you're lacking the fundamental movement pattern in order to get into that deep lunge position that we use in the technique, we recommend that you also incorporate flexibility, mobility, and stability into your programming. That will be discussed further in the 5th presentation. For now, let's move right along and get familiarized with the warm-up on the strength rush days. The warm-up has two purposes. It acts as an injury reduction strategy, but also it allows us to be ready for the activities that we're about to do so we can perform them at higher loads with reduced fatigue. Every single warm-up should always start with a cardiovascular portion, at least 5 minutes. I personally enjoy doing 15 minutes, so if you want to do more than 5 and you have the time to do so, you certainly can. However, 5 minutes is more than enough for most people. For the rush warm-up, we recommend using a lower impact modality. As you can see in the table, there is a recommended lower impact modality that you can follow if you do not have access to any piece of equipment. However, you don't have to do this one. Anything that gets your heart rate up in a light to moderate effort, where you're getting a little bit of sweat, you're breathing a little bit heavier, you can certainly still hold a conversation, but it may be labored breathing, and you're certainly not maxing your heart rate, will be appropriate. Things like biking, using an elliptical, a rower, or even going outside for a speed walk may be appropriate for you. Once you've done your 5 minutes of cardio, or more if you choose to do so, we move on to the movement preparation phase, which is warm-up part B. We have 5 specific movements that we do to warm up our legs primarily, and then we move on to 3 rounds of rush progressions. In terms of all of these movements, the ones found in the table for the cardio warm-up, as well as the ones found in warm-up part B, we go through these in a separate video, which you can watch following this one. The link will be in the description. As for the rush progressions, make sure that you follow the rush progression series, which are also a separate YouTube link, which will be included in the description below. We recommend that you start at the rush progression number 2, as number 1, you will notice, can be done at any time of the day. Once you feel comfortable with rush progression number 2, ideally you've done it maybe for 1 or 2 weeks, you can move on and do rush progression number 3, so on and so forth. Keep that in mind when you're doing the warm-up, as we will want to have gone through all 8 of those progressions and be comfortable at the final stage of the progression before moving on to block C, which is going to be discussed in the next slide. Let's take a look at the main set of the 3 blocks within the programming. First, let's talk about the similarities between each of these blocks. We see that each block has 2 supersets, an upper body push-pull and a lower body push-pull. The upper body push will focus primarily on strength and power development in the chest, which will work towards explosivity out of the prone hand release position while you're doing the rushes component of the force test. In terms of upper body pull, we're essentially working on strength and power development for injury reduction strategies of the upper back, so we don't cause any asymmetries front and back by overdeveloping the chest and not working the upper back muscles. Moving on to the lower body, both the push and the pull mechanisms will be beneficial for top-end running speed, and specifically the push will transfer very well to the acceleration phase out of the chest to floor when you're using our recommended technique, which gets you in a deep 3-point track start and then accelerating out to the 10-meter or the 20-meter line respectively. Each block was conceptualized to be completed over a 4-week period. However, you may choose to do block A and B for a bit longer if you desire. There are two main reasons why I thought of that would make sense to stay longer in these phases, in these blocks. However, if you think of another reason, that's legitimate as well. The first one I thought of was if you're still working on your rush technique and you need a little bit more time before getting to progression number 8, before moving on to block C, then you may want to spend a little bit more time in blocks A and B in order to achieve that. You'll notice in block C, we do prone sprints, 4 facing forwards and 4 facing backwards. And that is essentially progression number 8 of the rush technique. So if you're not there yet, you need to spend more time in blocks A and B so that you can do block C as it is written. The second reason why you may want to spend longer in blocks A and B is that if you're still progressing, each week, if you're still able to increase the intensity while doing the movement, you're still doing what's called progressive overload and you're still getting benefit from the block. If you're staying stagnant at a specific level within the block or a specific intensity, then it's time to move up. So for some of us, it may be 4 weeks, some may be 6 or 8. Usually, if you're still progressing after week 8, we can look at steeper progressions so that we can move on. Now, let's take a look at each block individually. Block A is the movement acquisition or base building phase where we use a unilateral approach, except for the deadlifts, which we discuss later. Block B, we move to a bilateral approach, focusing on strength and hypertrophy. And once we've developed that strength, then we can start focusing on power. Remember that this program was conceptualized to assist members to pass the FORCE test. With this in mind, it is assumed that most individuals starting at Block A will not have been regularly training in terms of strength for the last 3-6 months, maybe even longer. Therefore, we need to start with base building and work our way up to power. If you regularly do strength training in terms of upper body push, upper body pull, lower body push, and lower body pull using these specific modalities, it may be appropriate for you to start in Block C. And if you think that's the case, let us know and we can better guide you towards where to start. Now, let's take a look at each block individually. In terms of Block A, the first thing I want to discuss is the rest as needed parentheses. In essence, when your pulling muscles are working, your pushing muscles are resting and vice versa. As well, since we're using a unilateral approach, when your right arm is working, your left arm is resting and vice versa. Therefore, you should be able to complete this in a circuit style 3 times through, only resting as needed. You shouldn't really require any rest. However, you may take some if you need it. In Block A, our upper body section, which is on the left side of this chart, is going to use a unilateral push-pull with bands primarily. Recall that unilateral means one arm. And to complete the push portion, you will start with 10 single arm chest presses with your left arm, followed by 10 single arm chest presses with your right arm. You'll then proceed with 10 single arm rows on your left arm and 10 single arms row on your right arm, proceeding 3 times through. In order to elicit proper adaptations, ensure that you maintain control and stability while completing these movements. After all, this isn't CrossFit. You're not going to win by finishing the workout first. You're really not. You're going to do more damage than good. So in order to accomplish this, we recommend the following tempo, which is a 2:02. A tempo 2:02 basically is how many seconds the eccentric phase, the pause, and then the concentric phase will take. So we take 2 seconds to extend, no pause, immediately into a 2-second return to starting position. So the push will look like this, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then the pull will look like this, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now let's talk about progressing. How do we get stronger throughout the weeks? Essentially, there are 3 ways to do this with a band. We recommend that you start with a light to moderate band, and that's going to help you familiarize yourself with movements and better gauge what is an appropriate starting place. So if you underemphasize what you think you can do, you're probably going to be in a good spot. And if you're not in a good spot, then that's okay, because that'll tell you where you can start. If you start too heavy right off the bat, it's not going to be a fun time. How to progress is by either stepping further away from the anchor point, adding a thicker band, or using multiple bands. We always start with a band fully taut before we start the movements. If you do not have a band, then we do have a separate video where we go through all of the demonstrations of how to do the movements with a band, as well as how to do them with any other form of equipment that you may have at your disposal. The link is in the description below, and we go through each of the blocks. So please take a look at that if you have any questions surrounding this. However, let's move right along into the lower body portion of the session, where we have a unilateral push and a bilateral pull. You're going to start with 10 reverse lunges on your left leg, 10 on your right leg, immediately into 10 deadlifts, and proceeding 3 times through. When you're doing your reverse lunges, it's important to focus on your running arms. So as you lunge down, your opposite arm comes up, and then swing through as if you were running. Similar to the upper body section, your working muscles are working while your opposite muscles are resting, and vice versa, so only rest is needed. The progressions will look as follows. Start with body weight for lunges and progress by adding a backpack or a weighted vest so that your arms are still free to do those running arm motions. As for the sandbag, we recommend starting with 20 kilograms. That is the weight that you're going to be using for the sandbag lifts, and then progress from there. Your progressions may look as little as 1 to 2 kilograms, as high as 10 kilograms per week or more, depending on how strong you are or how adapted you are to these movements. In terms of adding weight, one thing that we want to consider is never compromising the movements. So how we compromise the movement for our lunges is by leaning too far forward or the knee caving in. And how we compromise the movement for the deadlift would be by arching the back, either in a kyphos or a lower dose movement, so flexion or extension. And these will increase your risk of injury. If you're able to lift the weight, but you're not moving properly, yes, you're getting more strength gains, but at the risk of injury, and it's just not worth it. The strength gain is about this much, and the risk of injury is, you can't even see it because I'm outside of the screen. It's massive. So stick within your ability to lift with proper form and progress as high as you can. And this is true as well for the upper body section. This concludes the section for Block A. Let's move right along to Block B. As you recall, Block A was the base building, primarily with unilateral movements. Block B is the strength hypertrophy, primarily with bilateral movements. The upper body push-pull superset is now 3 rounds of 10 hand release push-ups and 10 rows. I'm going to go through the progressions first. The push-up progression will depend on your ability. Taking a page of the book from the Rush progressions, you should initiate your movement with your supporting muscles activated, and you need to move as one when you're doing your push-ups. If you're bending at the spine or snaking up throughout your movements, this will result, once again, in actually less improvements in strength and a greater risk of injury. So it's really a double whammy. So what we recommend you do is do as many as you can from your feet, so long as you're moving as one unit. And as soon as you're starting to get to that failure point or you're starting to snake a bit, drop to your knees and finish it off. So it may look like 10 hand release push-ups from your feet the first round, then you're only able to do 6 and you finish the last 4 of your second round from your knees. And then the third round, you may only be able to do 4 from your feet and the last 6 from your knees. Whatever it looks like for you, complete it accordingly. If you're able to finish all 3 sets from your feet, Then you can add and progress by putting weight on your back. Ideally, a backpack or weight vest will work so that your arms are still free to go. And if you're doing it from your knees, then it's how many of those 30 can I do for my feet from week to week? So in the example I just gave, we did 10, 6, and 4. That was 20 of the 30 from the feet. Can I get 21 the following week? Can I get 22 the following week? Can I get up to that 30? You don't have to get to all 30 before moving on to block C, but as close as possible would be great. In terms of the rows, you can do it with weight or with a band, and we're using both arms this time. So you're going to want a thicker band or multiple bands compared to just the single arm that you were doing at the end of block A. The progressions are the same, step further away, thicker bands or more bands. If you're using the weight, the progression is the same as the deadlifts or the lunges. Speaking of deadlifts and lunges, let's take a look at superset 2, the lower body superset. You'll notice the deadlifts are the same, so keep progressing where you left off in block A. In terms of the lunges, we changed from the reverse lunges to the Bulgarian split squat. So since this is a new movement, we recommend starting back at body weight, or at least at 50% of where you finished off with the lunges, and then building from there. Let's say you added 5 weeks in the lunges in block A. Now that we're in block B, try to progress a little bit more quickly. So maybe each week add 7 or 10 pounds so that you finish at a higher end weight, so long as you're not jeopardizing the movement. Once again, we're using a backpack or a weighted vest to ensure our arms are still able to move. That's it for block B. Let's look at block C. If you recall, block C is the power phase. And I want to explain what power is before continuing on here. Power is a combination of speed and weight. It's not about lifting the heaviest. That's what we did in block A and B. We progressed to the heaviest lift that we could do. Now it's about moving very quickly through a moderately to heavy weight. As such, we're going to start back at body weight or 50% weight for most of the movements so that we can work on that power. Recall that the movements so let's take a look now at the top down. We start with the 4 prone sprints that I already talked about. So remember, we want to be through the rush progressions before we get into block C so that we can do these prone sprints practicing the actual technique that we want to be using. As for the superset itself, the push-ups turn into explosive deep lunge push-ups, still doing the hand release at the bottom. Starting only at body weight, and you can add weight if you want to, but you can also just stay at body weight each and every single week. In order to get more power output, it's about doing it quicker, doing it faster, and getting into that deep lunge as quickly as possible, or even exploding higher up in that push. We take 1 minute rest and then we proceed to our 10 banded rows. The change here is the tempo. Instead of doing a 202, which worked on strength, we do a 104. So we explode through the row, no rest, and immediately 4, 3, 2, 1 row. That's what it's going to look like when you're doing your explosive rows. We rest a minute again, and then we repeat 3 times. Here, while the same principle exists for the strength as for the power, your pushing muscles are working while your pulling muscles are resting and vice versa. We need more rest when we're working on power because of that speed component. If we try to work power under fatigue, we can still do the movement, but if we're not doing it fast, we're not working on the power. So take the rest. It's no longer rest is needed, and every single movement should be clean, crisp, fast, and precise. If you need more than 1 minute rest, go ahead and take it. Moving right along to the lower body, the explosive component of the Bulgarian split squat comes with a jump on that front leg. We bring it back down to body weight no matter where we ended off, and we can stay at body weight the entire time just like we did with the push-ups. It's about jumping higher and exploding faster throughout the movements. Taking 1 minute after you've done your 10 on your right leg and your 10 on your left leg. And then the power from the deadlifts come with either kettlebell swings or granny tosses, depending on what piece of equipment you have. No matter how heavy you finished off, we start with 20 kilograms and you can stay there the entire week. or the entire 4 weeks, sorry. In terms of granny toss, it's about throwing that ball further. And in terms of kettlebell swings, it's about exploding through the movements at a faster speed every single week. If you want to add some weight, go ahead and do so, but keep it moderately heavy. Do not get to that maximal strength so that we can continue to focus on our power. That's it for the main set. Let's look now at the ancillary set. All right, so now we're going to talk about the ancillary workout. Once you've concluded the main part of your workout, we have 9 minutes of ancillary core strengthening development. As you're aware, ancillary means extra by nature, and therefore it is not required to be completed. However, the movements are immensely important for strengthening the supporting muscle groups that transfer to power. So it is definitely highly recommended and encouraged that you do take the time to complete this section if your training time allows you to do so. You will notice that there are 2 options, even weeks and odd weeks. Ideally, you'll alternate between the weeks, but if there's one that you prefer over the other, there's really no harm to just sticking to it. Additionally, you'll notice that each training phase, the work to rest ratio changes. During block A, our recommended, keyword here, recommended, and I'll be discussing at the end here what I mean by that. Work to rest ratio is 30 seconds of work, 30 seconds of rest. To make this part of the program more challenging in block B, the work to rest ratio is 40 seconds of work and 20 seconds of rest. And then in block C, we have 50 seconds of work and 10 seconds of rest. So let's give you an example. Should you find yourself completing week 1 with 30 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest with ease, you can do 1 or 2 of the following things. You can either increase the duration of work and decrease the duration of rest. So basically do block B or C's recommended work to rest ratio, regardless of the block that you're in. Or you can pick an adaptation that suits and challenges the prescribed time. The link in the description below has all of the ancillary workout movements and how to modify them if you don't have the equipment, or how to make them more or less challenging. So watch that video in order to pick the appropriate intensity for the working phase while you're doing your ancillary work. Now remember how I said it is recommended that you do the work to rest ratio in a specific block? This is one of the only times that we will recommend that you can actually progress much more quickly than what we have written down. And that's because if you're not eliciting enough strength gains in this ancillary work, then you need to make it more challenging. As I explained before, there's 2 ways to do that: make the movements more challenging or increase the work to rest ratio. That's it for the ancillary workout component. We got 1 more slide to go. Final slide here, and it's the cool down, everyone's favorite part, but commonly the part that most people opt to not do. It is extremely, extremely important to do a cool down, not only for injury prevention, but to ensure that we're adequately recovering before our next workout. This helps expedite that. A cool down will look as follows. You can do 5 minutes of low impact, light cardio effort. So this isn't moderate or vigorous by any means. It's to bring our heart rate back down. Things like walking around the block, going on a spin bike, rowing, elliptical, whatever works for you is appropriate. And then proceeding to stretch for another 5 minutes. These stretches should only be held for 20 to 30 seconds at a time, and that should hit the major muscle groups that we worked on. So today, the major muscle groups were the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the pecs, and the upper back, predominantly the rhomboids and the traps. If you need an example of these stretches, they'll be discussed in our last presentation where we do mobility, stability, and flexibility. And you can always find more information online. There's lots of great resources on YouTube on stretching. We recommend 20 to 30 seconds to help bring the blood flow back, but we don't want to stretch for too much longer because here we're not focusing on improved flexibility. When we work on improved flexibility, as you'll learn in the flexibility, mobility, stability programming, we want to hold it for 30 seconds to a minute, if not longer. But that's not the goal here. The goal here is to cool down, to get the blood flow back to the heart, and to get the muscles to stretch just slightly, but not improve the flexibility of the muscles. So 20 to 30 seconds, switch to the next muscle group and keep flowing through it. You should be able to hit every muscle group in about 5 minutes. That's it for the cool down, and that's it for today's presentation. Please watch the supporting videos linked in the description below to bring context to what we discussed today.